Hello and welcome to anyone who's watching this video. This is the third part of a set of videos I've done, which start with buying a cheap grinder, and then that's the first video. The second video is about grinding maintenance, safety, how to look after stones, keep them sharp and such like. And this is the third part of how I actually grind my tools and sharpen them. It may be a little bit unorthodox to some people. It's to the Puritans and such like. This is just what I do. This is my way of sharpening tools. They turn out well. They're easy to sharpen. So I'm just going to share with you what I do. If you disagree or you have your own views on it, it's not a problem to me. This is just my way of looking at it. I tend not to do things by the book. I haven't found a book yet that'll cut a piece of wood. It might tell you how to sharpen something, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. So this is what I do from my own experience and from years of doing it. So I'll start by saying the blades that don't respond well to a high-speed grinder are Japanese chisels, laminated blades. Really don't like being put on a grinder. If you put yours on a grinder and it's okay for you, that's fine. But my experience is it doesn't work very well. I had some Japanese chisels, but I got rid of them because it was just too much trouble to look after them. If you nicked them, it was too big of a job to get the nicks out, and they didn't like the grinder. So I was having to do them by hand, so I decided it was just a waste of time as far as I was concerned. The other blades that are difficult and not too keen are the very hard sort of new generation of blades, like the Veritas PM V11. I have ground that on my high-speed grinder, but it's not ideal. It can be done, but it's not ideal. So from there, I'll now do a kind of explanation and a kind of demonstration in words, and to try and show you how I do it. At the end of this video, I've got another clip that I did earlier that actually shows me grinding blades on the grinder, and but that's got no explanation to it. There's no words to it. It's just a demonstration of me grinding blades. I was in the garden because that's the only place I could do it. There was quite a wind blowing, so I thought this was the best way of doing it. Now I can explain in detail what I do, and then you can watch the video at the end of actually watching me do it, which kind of gives a time frame of how long it takes. So I've already done a video on this cheap grinder. I've done a video on stones, different types of stones and how to look after them, and safety. So this now is purely how I grind a tool using a high-speed grinder. The most useful thing and absolutely essential are these wheel dressers, these diamond wheel dressers. They're on Amazon, 3 for a tenner, and you've got to keep the stone dressed, because if the stone glazes, it'll not cut, and it'll generate a lot of heat, and you won't get a sharp blade. You might get a blue one, but you won't get a sharp one. So that you have to regularly dress the stone. You must keep this surface loose. It relies on loose grit in order for it to work. If this gets polished, it only generates heat and it doesn't take any cut. So what we're looking at is, this is one that I've actually ground on the grinder. It hasn't had its sharpening yet, but it's actually, I've ground that on the grinder. and that's typically what I'd end up with. The grind isn't entirely flat, it's very, very slightly, you could hardly measure it, but it's very, very slightly concave in this way. And I'll explain how that works as we go on. So that's typically what I'd end up with. That would cut just as it is off the grinder, but obviously I'd put an edge on it myself. So after it's sharpened, it would look like that, where I've got a slight sharpened edge on there. You can see that it's slightly here and slightly there, because as I'm putting it on the stone, it's sitting on those two corners. It's sitting on this edge where it's sharpening, and that edge, which gives it stability. Again, I'll explain that in a bit more detail. A planer iron would typically turn out like that. And again, it would probably cut like that, but you know, I'd never do that. I'd always put an edge on it. And then when it's finished, it'll look something like that. You can see it's like the slight unevenness in the grind, but that really doesn't matter. All that matters is that this edge is completely polished, if you want, for want of a better word. You can see this back edge is slightly polished as well, because that's the hollowness in the grind. So how I'd go about that is I use my finger as a gauge. So I grip the chisel like that, and this is basically a fence. I've modified this grind. I've mentioned this in a previous video. I've cut these sections out here because they were sticking out square. When I'm grinding, I'm working back and two across there. So if they're square, they're in the way. So you want a flat surface. And I start by looking roughly about halfway up the stone would be a good place to start. Equidistant between there, about halfway, is where I would start to grind. So I'd introduce the chisel like that, and I use my finger here as a gauge so that I can grind back and two. I can take it off and have a look at the progress and put it back in the same place, because I'm using this, my finger on this fence as a guide. And then also when I take it off, I dip it in water to cool it. I put it back, I can put it back in exactly the same place. That finger doesn't move. If I think the angle's too steep, I'll just shorten it a bit. Sorry, too shallow. I'll just shorten it a bit, and my finger there is the guide, and it stays there so that I can put it back and two off the stone, look at it, dip it in water, and keep going back to the same place. When you're doing it, you're not putting any pressure on this at all. You're just resting the chisel on the fence, and you're just resting it on the blade. There is no pressure and no weight involved. Just its own self a touch in there will grind. If you put pressure or put weight on it, that generates heat, and that's what leads to burning and causing problems. It's literally keeping the stone sharp and just letting the stone rest on letting the blade rest on the stone and moving it back into it. Constantly move it. Don't keep it in one place. I'll then use a square to check it for square, just to see how I'm going, and I'll make any adjustments either like this or like this. Obviously that's exaggerated, but I'll make adjustments one way or the other just to get it square. And I do exactly the same with the plane irons. So I'll use my finger as a guide, and I'll rest it on there about halfway again as a starting point. And I'll just use my finger. I might only have my finger on halfway so I can get back and two, like that. But I'll use that as a guide, and I'll just run back and two. Again, no pressure. You're just resting it on the stone. Let it do its own thing. If you can't put your hand on it, it's too hot. So I've ground blades before now where I've been able to grind them and just touch them, and I've ground the entire blade and still been able to touch it. But if you find it's getting too hot to touch, dip it in some water and keep it cool. Regularly dress the stone. You can see this has got black marks on it. On a white stone you'll see it like that, it's starting to clog up, if you like. Use that and dress it back off till it's white. This is a green stone. Again, it'll glaze. You won't necessarily see it, but it'll glaze. So just keep it dressed. So you'll see in the video of me doing it that I'm dressing it all the time, because this stone the grit in it must remain mobile. It mustn't be polished. So as for the angle, I think I might move the grinder away now, and then you can get a better view. Let's cast in the shadow now. Excuse me a moment. That's better. Some of the stone dust's come out on here. I do apologise if it looks a mess, but this is the grinding stone dust that's on the table. So I'm looking at something like that as a grind. These are just old chisels that I pulled out the garage to do a demonstration. But that's about the angle I'm looking at to be where I want it. So I've got two here to show you what I don't want, and this one is too steep. The angle on that, it's too steep. And this one, the angle is too shallow. So if I can put all three together, it is just a trial and error. It is just a trial and error. I'm having difficulty holding those. But the one on the right is too steep. Sorry, the one on the right is too shallow, and the one on the left is too steep. So the one in the middle is where I'd want it to be. That one's too shallow. And that one's too steep. So I have no way of measuring that. I just do it by eye. And I'm happy with it when I'm happy with it. Once I've got those like that, I'll then take an oil stone. I use an Indian oil stone. I've tried diamond stones, I don't get on with them. It's coarse one side, fine the other. And I basically I feel the angle of where the bevel is that I've ground, and I just sharpen on that angle so it's halfway on the heel and halfway on the toe. If you can feel it, because you're dealing with a big surface, and I just sharpen it at that. And the same goes with the plain blades. I feel the bevel that I've ground, and I grind at that. I personally grind my my plain irons with a slight camber on them. I don't like taking the corners off. I do all mine with a slight camber on. It's only a small amount, but that's how I prefer them. It works for me. I find it if you're cutting the edge of something, camber can be an advantage, because if you were shooting boards together, it slightly cuts the joint hollow, and that helps in it being tight. So that's how I do that. As again, they would turn out roughly like this. You can see you can see the grind part where it's slightly uneven. It'll never be perfect, but the sharpening part is sharp, clean and crisp, and that's the bit that matters. It's easy to do and it's easy to resharpen because you're only doing small amounts of blade on your oil stone. And the same applies to the chisel. You're only sharpening the very edge and you're only rubbing on this back piece here. And that makes a super sharp blade. Now, oil stones will glaze. They'll glaze over just the same as a grinding wheel does. And I use these diamond, I think some people call them diamond files. They're part of a diamond stone. I just put those on there and I rub it around with oil. And I take it off and I use it with that as it is. And that keeps the surface, again, keeping the bits mobile, keeping the surface mobile and the grip mobile, so that it's not glazed and polished. Otherwise you're just rubbing and getting nowhere. And people don't realise you need to keep an oil stone sort of sharp. The grip needs to be mobile on it and it doesn't want to be glazed. In certain circumstances, in fact you can see a little bit in this, you'll start to pick up bits of metal that will get stuck in the surface. And doing that will remove them and keep the surface. It helps keep it flat and it keeps it sharp. This is only a 6-inch stone. I picked it up second hand. It's a good stone, but you're better off with an 8-inch really. So in summary of that, roughly the profile, this would be the traditional way of doing it, a bevel. You'd have a bevel and then you'd put a sharpening micro bevel on it. What I'm actually doing is slightly concave in the grind, and I'm using these 2 points on the stone to rest, so it gives you stability. You're still getting your micro bevel, but you've got that to rest on, so it gives the blade stability when you're grinding it. If you got a bevel like that and then you put a micro bevel on it, you can do this business, kind of spooning it. But when you do it the way I've done it, with a hollow grind like that, and you rest it, you've got something solid to push against, so it stops the rock. And I found it to be successful and easy. The other advantage is it helps it if you're driving that chisel into something. As you can imagine, if you're driving that chisel into a piece of wood, you're actually driving into a thicker wedge. Whereas when it's like this, you're driving it into you've still got the same angle, but you're driving into less material. And that makes a big difference when you come to chopping things out and stuff like that. So I think that about sums it up as an explanation of what I do. As I said, it's not a Puritan's way of sharpening things, but I've been doing this for 47 years and I tend to do some things my own way because I found it's easier for me and I get better results. Excuse me a minute. So at the end of this video I'm going to attach an actual demonstration when I was in the garden grinding on the stone with these actual chisels that I've shown you, and that will give you a guide to how long to grind for, keeping the blade cool, dressing the wheel, and so forth. There is no commentary on that because I was outside blowing a gale, to be honest. So it's a video I wanted to do. I hope it helps somebody, and I know I can make it look easy, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of practice. But my suggestion would be start, if you've got some old chisels, or even buy a really cheap set of chisels, because you can buy a set of chisels for £10 now, and just practice on those, or get an old planer blade and practice, an old plain blade and practice on that, rather than using your good stuff until you get used to the feel of it and what it's like. If you burn it, I mean, you can burn them. I did try to burn one deliberately, so I could show it you, but it wouldn't burn. I'd got the stones dressed that well that it just refused to burn. So keeping the stones dressed is a key to keeping the heat out of the blade. But if you do burn it, it's not the end of the world. Just grind it off, and just grind the bluing out, and start again and keep it cool. One thing I will say about that, if you'll notice when I'm doing the demonstration, I'll just move this out there for better visibility. If you're regrinding a blade and it's chipped or nicked, put it square into the grind wheel and grind that off square. Don't grind the whole lot back. Don't grind that whole surface. If you've got nicks and chips in here, don't grind all that surface back at that angle like that, because you're grinding a bigger surface, generating more heat and taking more time. So stick it straight on the grinder and blunt it off and get the chips out of it, just like that, straight in, and just grind it off square, and then come to put the bevel back on. You'll be taking less material and generating less heat. So always grind your chips and nicks out first, just square straight in like a bar, and then put the bevel back on after. You're removing less material at a time and generating less heat. So I think that just about covers everything. So I'll leave it there. I'll attach this other video to the end of it so you can actually see a sort of time frame of how long it takes me. I don't rush it, and it's probably about, to do a chisel, I think to do that chisel, and just to grind it, and to do that plain iron, which is a number 4. It probably took me about 15 minutes. I think the video's about 15 minutes long. It might appear to be a bit boring. As I said, there's no commentary on it, so, but it does help to actually watch what I do, and you might be able to pick up quite a lot from it, so I'd suggest you watch that. So thanks for watching, and take care.